The night shift can be the epitome of terrifying. So grab your flashlight, because it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I worked night stock at a Navy exchange in Hawaii. It's basically like a Macy's for the military base. And it paid decent to a guy like me with a useless bachelor's degree. We typically worked from about 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. and my co-workers were a pretty rowdy bunch, so it never really felt very eerie most of the time, because it felt like if ghosts existed, they'd be scared off by those maniacs. But once my boss sent me and Matt back into the quiet and poorly lit storage area to get some appliances for the kitchen department. The storage area was set up by making these artificial aisles using pallets with stacked merchandise on top of them. There were stacks of vacuum cleaners, toaster ovens over shoulder height, and when I went down one aisle and Matt went down another, I could barely see the top of his shaved bald head poking over the top. I had my little metal cart, and I was loading up blenders or whatever, when I heard a muffled sound from the walls. First it was like a squeak noise, but as it got louder, it sounded more like a child sobbing, and then it turned into a full-blown crying and wailing. Then I saw a white, floating blob of light appear above me in the middle of the aisle. It floated towards the center of the aisle, then did a 90-degree turn and zoomed out of sight. At first, I thought I was going nuts, but then Matt sprinted over to me and said, "What the hell was that? Did you see it?" It could have been a puff of smoke or something, but in Hawaii, we don't often use gas or steam in buildings because it's so hot all year. We've never been able to rationalize what it was. I used to work graveyards at a youth detention center. I had this big black guy working with me. It was just the two of us, and he was scared of the dark. And so we would put him in the control room with all the camera screens. I'm reading a book between welfare checks, and the blinds on the window are slowly starting to roll down. Really slow. Like deliberately slow. Anyway, this kind of freaked me out. But I'm a pretty logical guy, so I brushed it off and tried to just focus on my book. And when I'm about to do my next check, as we have to do checks on the kids every 15 minutes to make sure that they haven't hung themselves or tried to break out or something. So about 5 minutes after the window blind incident, I'm about to get up and go to do a check when my radio turns on and a woman yells, "Jump!" which of course made me jump. We didn't have a woman on duty, and our radios are protected from outside radios nearby. Or so they told me. Then I thought perhaps it was just my co-worker trying to mess with me. When I confronted him about it, he told me that he didn't think those kind of jokes were funny because he's afraid of the dark and would never do that. The guy almost had tears in his eyes. He was more freaked out than I was, but I was still freaked out. So I spent the rest of the night in the control room with my friend and would walk all the way to the other side of the facility to do my checks. I didn't want to be in that room alone again. I found out later that at least one kid had died there years before, and for some reason, there have been other incidences in the same facility. One girl had Tupperware thrown across the room at her when she was doing some checks, and someone else had experienced the window blinds going up and down as well. In June of 2010, I got a job working in a nuclear security facility, which I loved and made good money. I was contracted security. Most of the people were great and fun to work with. In September of 2012, I found out I was pregnant. The security company I worked with hired several new guards in 2012. I'll call this guy Harry. He was a rather thin, small guy in his mid-40s, and seemed nice at first, until I left day shift to work night shift. We would work from 5:30 p.m. to 6 a.m. Everything seemed fine at first, no problems. As the nights went on, Harry would start smarting off to me for no reason. Basically, he acted like a jerk. Eventually, I went back to nights. I have no idea why the man was being so mean. I'm a Christian, and decided to kill him with kindness. I had found out that he and his wife were getting divorced, and he was having a hard time with it. I felt bad for him, because I've had 2 divorces and 3 marriages. Whenever I'd ask Harry a question, he would scream at me over the radio. Or I'd be walking to a new post, and if he were walking by, he would always run into me and knock me hard. I forgot to mention, I'm 5'11" and not a pushover. I really thought, okay, he's having a hard time and taking it out on me. At this job, if they were short on people, they would force overtime. And this night, Harry was forced to work the weekend on a different crew. I felt bad about him having to work the weekend, as he was supposed to be visiting his kids. The next time we worked, he bought me a letter from a so-called friend and asked me to rewrite it so he could send it to his wife, and apologized to me for being rude. I really didn't want to, and tried to tell him nicely no, but he insisted, so I reluctantly agreed. That's when he started telling me about his wife and how crazy she was. He tried to get her some help, saying she wasn't stable enough to get full custody of their kids. A couple of nights later, he started telling me things he would love to do to her. I really want to strangle her and watch the light drain from her eyes. He would say something along the lines of, if I decide to kill someone, no one would ever figure out where the bullet came from, and I could get on a plane and take my kids somewhere that no one would ever find us. He then looked at me with very cold eyes and told me, if you tell anyone what I said, I will cut your heart out and watch you bleed. At this point, I was beyond scared, and I went to my supervisor and told him about the threat. They pulled Harry's security clearance. When they did that, he glared at me with the scariest look I'd ever seen. My boss told me to make a police report, so I'll document what happened. Turned out he'd been arrested for harassment. Some older woman he harassed had pressed charges, as well as gained assault charges. I don't know how the hell he got that job with that record. In January 2013, I had taken a layoff because I was considered high risk because I'm a type 2 diabetic. His excuse was that we were both up for a permanent job at the site, but I turned down the position. I had gotten in touch with his ex and told her about the threats he made to her. I got a subpoena to testify in court, and when Harry found out, he started to follow me. He went at my husband's job looking around, and then I started getting phone calls where I could hear someone breathing hard down the receiver and never said a thing. Then he started calling the manager of the apartments, asking in which apartment I lived, what did my vehicle look like, and so on. This went on for about 2 months, scaring me to death. In March I went to court, and when he saw me, he grinned an evil grin I'd never seen before. I wasn't called to testify, and the shaking stopped. I later found out he'd been arrested for breaking into the house where his wife was living, and having several firearms in his possession that he wasn't supposed to have. When his wife moved to another house and went shopping, she came home to see her house was on fire. He was in the driveway grinning and laughing, while the firefighters were trying to put it out. I guess you'll remember to turn off the coffee maker next time. I've only seen him once since. For 3 months I was absolutely terrified of him, and I certainly hope I don't bump into him again. In April, I had my son. He was stillborn. I sometimes wonder if my son's death was because of all the stress I went through. So, I worked in an old train depot that was built just before the Civil War and was a focal point of some brief fighting. It got burnt, rebuilt, then decommissioned into an event venue in modern times. The building was very long and narrow with high ceilings. The walls were native stone, exposed. The depot, while decommissioned, sat next to inactive tracks that were still in use. So if you weren't paying attention, you could have a train roar past you and scare the bejesus out of you. Some events were late at night, and then a different event would be first thing in the morning. Say a wedding that went to midnight and a trade show the next day at 6. When events like that were close together, I'd have to go out to the depot and clean and flip it by myself in the middle of the night. One night, I'm there very late cleaning up after a wedding. Some decorations were left behind, which always happens. Tonight, they happened to have left some helium balloons. I always managed to spook myself out in the depot. There were spiders that lived in the cracks of the native stone walls that would scuttle in their holes when you got close. Not to mention, the floors creaked at night, and the place echoed. Every sound was louder in that building, especially at night and alone. I was mopping the floor, moving backwards and forwards, near the front, and swishing the mop in overlapping figure 8 movements, a technique I had heard they used in the Navy. I got almost to the end of the main open floor when I saw movement from the corner of my eye. I saw a balloon floating about chest height. So that was the end of the string, which was barely touching the floor. It was moving towards me down the middle of the building. The balloon floated from the hallway that connected the rear rooms of the depot to the big main event floor, as smoothly as if someone was drawing it along with a rod and reel. It stopped a few feet away from me. I was a child of the 90s, so I fully expected the Tim Curry Pennywise to yell something at me from the balcony where they stored the AV equipment. It was hard staying calm and finishing up that night, but I imagined I set a record time. I used to work at an animal shelter, and I would stay pretty late sometimes. I used to hate staying late because something weird would always happen. Once at around 7 p.m, I was just finishing up, and it was pitch black outside. I was already a little on edge, as the animals were making all sorts of weird noises, and knocking things over in their rooms. I had to head to the front of the building. It's one big open room, to turn out the lights and head out the back door to lock up. I get to the lights and start heading back to my desk. I drop my time card on my desk and take off. As I'm about halfway to the back door, I hear my card fall to the floor and clatter about. There's no way it could have moved, as it was flat on my desk. I thought for half a second that I should check it out, and then wisely decided against it. You better believe it that I booked it out of there immediately. Even weirder still, I was relaying this story to a co-worker a few days after, late at night again. I'm also telling her I've heard crystal clear little kid laughter before too. Right after I finish that, the motion sensor hand towel dispenser goes off in the bathroom down the hall. I obviously book it out of there, but my co-worker didn't seem too creeped out. That place is weird at night. I worked the night shift from 4 p.m. to 1 a.m. for a branch of a nationwide clothing store. Old building, maybe 50 years old. From about 9 till 1 a.m., the store was closed, and 3 of us would be working. I was often in the warehouse, alone. I started to notice music suddenly coming from one corner of the warehouse. No radio, but there was music. I also noticed the sound of children laughing and shouting. In the bathroom stalls right behind me, I would hear the water turn on by itself and doors slam. My co-workers were on the other end of the building. I'd go to check the bathroom and there'd be nobody there. This happened many times. Lights on the upper floor of the warehouse would turn on and off by themselves. Again, I would check to see if my co-workers were up there, and nobody was. This was so common that I actually learnt to ignore it. Tried to. Anyway, one time I was unloading a bin and was just standing there to catch my breath when something pinched me hard on the arm. So hard, I jumped and swore. This was not an insect or anything like that. It felt like someone squeezed my arm with 2 strong fingers. As I said, there were only 3 people in the building. The other 2 are out on the sales floor. Who is doing this? I told people that I hated to be alone on the store warehouse. However, I had no choice. Finally, one night, my supervisor saw something. The water suddenly turned on full blast in the bathroom, right behind us. It was very loud, and we just stared at each other. "Do you hear that?" I was grateful that someone else was there with me to experience it. Oddly enough, as we approached the bathroom door, the water turned off again. I explained some of the other things that I had been seeing and hearing. I got pretty upset. Thankfully, the facility was shut down 6 months later. The official report was that inspectors found asbestos, and obviously that meant it had to go. At a luncheon, I had a chance to speak with my old supervisor, the one who heard the water at night. He told me that there were many accidents and unexplained injuries in that warehouse, including my co-worker Marie, who swore that she had been pushed down the metal warehouse stairs by a ghost. If you ever want to hear some of the most twisted stories you'll ever find in your life, just ask the regular graveyard guy at your local all-night convenience store for some of the shit he's seen. And dear God, man, bring some popcorn. In my life, I've been the graveyard guy for not one, not two, but 3 7-Eleven locations. And I'm going to bring the bulk of my horror stories to you lovely people. This one is about a gentleman named Richard. Working the graveyard shift, I was the lone employee from just after 10 PM at night to just before 6 AM. Not only that, but the next nearest all-nighter anything was another convenience store over 2 miles away. So you could just barely see the light pollution from their neon. This setup alone made for many interesting happenings. And tonight, it was a Saturday night going into Sunday morning, just after 4 AM, when a middle-aged man with thick glasses and a week-old stubble, he wasn't unpleasant at first. He made small talk as he walked through the store, sometimes with me, sometimes to no one in particular. He mentioned things about the weather. He asked about the hot dogs and taquitos on the grill. It was what it was at first, but then the comments started slipping in. Minor vulgarities and weird things. After walking about the store for a good 20 minutes, he comes up to the register to check out, without anything to actually buy. I asked if he needed help with anything, and asked me what I knew about the Antichrist. All right, well, I know enough, I guess. I was raised Catholic, so I know quite a bit on the subject. And so, he stares at me, eyes wide, mouth pursed. I wasn't sure if he was about to bite me on the face or kiss me on the lips, and not being able to tell the difference made me uneasy. The man: I should get a hot dog. Me? Alright, which one? The man says, one of the big ones. I want to enjoy it. There'll be no more hot dogs when the Antichrist comes. It sounds like a ridiculous statement. Okay, it is a ridiculous statement. But when said with genuine menace, it becomes a thinly veiled harbinger of doom. I did my best to ignore it. I got his bread and his hot dog and handed it over to him. He walks around me to the condiment bar and he continued. The man goes, "You have onions?" Yeah. I love onions. Then there was a long pause. Yeah, many people do. They better enjoy them. There'll be no more onions once the Antichrist comes. There's really no way to respond to this, so I tried to go back to work. But even as I walk, as I stock cigarettes and start my nightly count, I can feel him watching every move I make. He comes up to the register with his hot dog, pays, and I hope to hell I'm done here. I say, "Thanks for coming. Have a good night, sir," and turn my back to the man. "Can I eat this here?" he replies. Probably not a good idea. The manager comes in at about 5:30. and he doesn't like it if anyone's hanging out here. Stuff to do, you know. I'm not worried about him, the man says. The shit part about this is that I was actually partially lying. The manager, James, my boss, and a really awesome guy, arrives between 5:30 and 5:45 every morning, Monday through Friday. But he avoided this place like the plague on weekends. I was trying to sell something that I knew wouldn't fly if this guy actually stuck around long enough for no one to show up. How he wasn't concerned about someone else showing up. Saturday nights are a busy time for the convenience store, but after 3:30 it becomes a ghost town. And it was just me and this guy for one extended, uninterrupted, messed up conversation after another. I tried to walk to stock some cups, but he'd be right behind me. There'll be no more cups and straws when the Antichrist comes. I arranged the beer and coffee. There'll be no more coffee when the Antichrist comes. I realize it sounds like a joke, but his panicked eyes and horribly hinting smile made it clear that he was dead serious about everything he said. 5 rolls around. Well, you should probably get going. Don't want that boss to get mad at me. The man said, he won't be mad at you. Me. It's just, he doesn't like people hanging around. The man says, we're just talking about the Bible. He said this so slickly sweet, it made my stomach churn. Yeah, but he's still going to be here soon. The man said, I'm not worried. I need to buy milk. I point to the display case. He walks back, grabs a thing of milk slowly, and robotically inspects the carton all the way back to the register. I love milk, he says. Oh, really? Yup. But there'll be no more milk when the Antichrist comes. The devil won't allow that. It's holy sustenance. Alright, so at this point, I'm sizing the guy up. He's about 5'9", and I'm 6'4", and I've got at least 100 pounds on him. So, I think if things go south, I think I can get a few good knocks in before he pulls out my liver and puts it on my head. At 5:10, I tell the man, you should really be going. The man replies, Jesus loves all his children. 5 minutes later, the boss is going to be here soon. I'm not worried about him. Another 5 minutes later. Is there anything else you need, sir? The devil is real. Jimmy Carter. This is where 2 things happened that if I hadn't lived through, I would have called bullshit. At 5:30, for the first time in almost 2 years, my boss James comes walking into the store on a Sunday morning. He managed to unbluff my bluff with this guy. And this is the jaw-dropping hilarious part for me. James had been out to the beach on Saturday. James had fallen asleep at the beach on Saturday. James had shaved his head fresh before going to the beach on Saturday. In other words, just as I told him, my boss came in at 5:30 on the dot with a completely shaved head, his long dark goatee, and bright red skin. As he walks in, I say, "What are you doing here?" My boss replies, "I honestly have no idea." He then looks at the guy. "Who's this?" I didn't answer. I looked at my boss. I looked at the guy, and then back at my boss. He looks at the guy, my boss, and he says, "Let's go outside and chat, friend." Less than 10 minutes later, the guy was walking off, and James, my boss, came back to the store. "So how are you?" What the hell was all that about? "Oh, Richard. Well, he started talking to me about Jesus. I started telling him about witchcraft. He said the Antichrist was coming. I said I was the Antichrist. Overloaded his circuits. He left. I love my boss. I wish this is where the story would end. But about 3 months later, I'm outside of the store smoking a cigarette, with a few regular customers of mine just chatting away. Somewhere in the distance, I hear, "Jesus, Lord God, help me." I perk up, but the people I'm with don't seem to notice. "Jesus, please, I know you can help me, it's closer now." And I actually say, "Oh, please, don't be Richard. Jesus Christ, come down from heaven and save me. Oh, please, don't be Richard." Sure enough, barreling around the side of the building and heading in my direction is a panicked, screaming, sweaty Richard, covered in his own blood. The people I'm with ask the appropriate question of, "Dude, why is he covered in blood?" I, on the other hand, had only one thought in mind and repeated it over and over and over. "Don't go in the store, don't go in the store, don't go in the store, damn it." I crush my cigarette out and run into the store. In the few seconds he's been in there, I now have blood all over the doors, the floors, the rug and the countertops. Jesus Christ, please come and save me. I grab him some towels and toss them in his general direction, trying to get an idea of the nature of his wounds whilst dialing 911. Now I can't be sure, because I haven't seen it before, but it looks quite possibly like he tried to crucify himself. Okay then. I call 911, and I tell them, "I have a gentleman in my store who is injured, screaming profanities, yelling about Jesus, and is covered in his own blood." "What?" asks the 911 operator. "His name is Richard, and I don't know how badly he's hurt." "Yeah." I hear her typing, and she asks the store name and the address. "All right, and you say he's screaming profanities? This Richard?" Then we hear him scream from the bathroom. "Did you happen to hear that?" Yes, I did." "And you said he's talking about Jesus?" Richard, who can still hear me, starts yelling out, "Jesus Christ, my Lord and Saviour, please come and save me." I ask the lady, "Did you happen to hear that?" Yes, I did." And then Richard, in all his glory, does the one thing that makes any convenience store clerk go aggro, especially one on Graveyard. I turn away from him and give the operator the store incident number, and when I turn around, Richard is behind the register. I drop the phone. "Richard, I don't give a shit what's wrong with you. If you don't get out from behind my counter, I will hang up from 911 and let you bleed to death right there." But the confrontation didn't last long. Before he could respond, there were 4 police officers with me. I thanked the 911 operator, hung up and left. Richard was handcuffed inside of an ambulance, and even the officers said it appeared he tried to do something harmful with religious significance. I thanked them for coming so quickly, and we laughed about the strangeness of it all. And then I asked a question I wish I hadn't. "So, who cleans up all this blood?" The lead officer laughs. "That be you." I work night shifts at a care home. Obviously, there have been a lot of deaths within the home, and I am very open and susceptible to experiencing the paranormal. One night, I was filling in the hourly log notes in the lounge, which has a huge window, so we can see if any residents get up. The lights in the hall were off to give the residents a calm environment for sleep. The doors, situated within the hall, were heavy fire doors and were often difficult to push open. I saw what looked like one of my vulnerable residents walking along the corridor. I hear the hall fire door bang, which indicated it had been pushed open and left to close on its own. And then I saw her walk towards the direction she came from, but this time without the bang of the door, which I didn't pay much attention to. I was just concerned about her walking around the hall at 3 a.m. Her room was at the very end of the long corridor, and her walking pace wasn't very fast. Assuming she was disoriented and needed help, I quickly put my log notes down and got up to give her a hand and guide her back to bed. I asked her if there was anything else she needed, although when I got up and walked out of the lounge door, I looked down the corridor and she wasn't there. There was no way on earth that she could have got back to her bedroom within the 10 seconds it took me to react. My co-worker also witnessed this, and I'm glad, because I thought I was losing my mind with lack of sleep. I walked along the corridor, using the torch on my phone for light, and entered her room. She was fast asleep, literally hadn't moved from the position I put her in an hour previously. I then had to assume that a previous deceased resident was still here and wandering the unit. I hope she's okay and finds peace. I used to work night security at a group residential building that had been converted from old factories, like 1800s old. Some of the buildings still had a few features from where they were industrial. The basic concept of the building were live and work spaces for people running photo studios and the like. The first building was commercial only. It was almost always completely empty at night after a certain time. It had this dinosaur of a freight elevator at one end of the building, and the other one was a loft that contained the roof hatch. The maintenance guy would sometimes forget to secure it, and on windy nights you can hear it bang around. When it was left open, you could also hear the elevator machinery from the floor below, when the elevator was in use. Also, this building is 2 floors and laid out as more or less a straight line from one end to the other. So, no one can come or go on that floor without me noticing. One night, after I'd shortly started working there was a foot patrol of the building, and was at the loft end of the building, and I could hear the roof hatch door banging open and the buzz of the freight elevator machinery starting up. After a small heart attack, I went to check the far end of the building to see what was happening, but there was no one. But the elevator had moved between floors. No one came out of any commercial space onto the second floor. I would have heard them opening and closing their doors, moving in the hallway. Also, there's nowhere to go, because it's a straight line, except for the elevator that is around a corner. It can't be someone on the first floor messing with me, because there's a call button on each floor, so there's no way to control the elevator from the outside. Other than that, in order to control the elevator, you have to be inside. So I would have either seen them in the hall or found them standing in an elevator. Also, this particular elevator is one of those really old manual style ones where you have to open and close the door by hand, and it's difficult to do quietly. Also, the elevator doesn't move at all until the doors are closed manually. Last time I had seen the elevator, it had been on the first floor with the doors open. I work nights alone, but with a sleeping co-worker who I can wake up in case of emergencies. At a home for developmentally challenged adults, helping them out with whatever needs to be done. which usually isn't all that much, since they sleep. I'm not armed in any way, and wouldn't want to be. I'm around 5'7" and 140 pounds of pure love. One of the residents, a very autistic gentleman, sometimes has the habit of coming out and asking me in the middle of the night if he can sleep in. If he doesn't have to get up in the morning, like if it's a weekend, or his stay-at-home day. He likes to be reassured that he doesn't have to get up, as he hates mornings. He sleeps with his socks on and has a very light, shuffling gait, which is almost completely inaudible. On a shift, I'm sitting in the main room, watching a television program about political analysis. With all of my attention on the program, all of a sudden, right next to my left ear, a soft voice whispers out, "Can I sleep in tomorrow morning?" And I jump 10 feet out my chair. The guy had snuck up on me, obviously, without meaning any harm. But I had to explain to him that doing that was a very bad idea, and that he should have let his presence be known, because I couldn't guarantee that I might not react differently, and perhaps strike out at him out of instinct, if he ever did something like that again. Fortunately, he got the point. He still sneaks around, but now stops some 15 feet away from where I am to ask his usual question. Usually, I know when he leaves the room, as the hallway lights turn on via motion sensor, but on that night, I was facing away from that particular hallway. On another occasion, some of my co-workers have also reported unexplained sounds they like to attribute to ghosts, but I've never heard of ghosts killing or hurting people. That's if they even exist. I'm sure they're pretty chill. And another time, I was called to handle the situation as my not yet sleeping co-worker was scared out of her mind, since one of the toilets was locked from the inside, but we were the only two people there beside the residents, all accounted for in their rooms. We considered calling the police, but I figured I could take care of the situation myself. For a brief moment, I was prepared to deal with some random person who had locked themselves in our toilet, but for whatever reason, as I unlocked it, it was fortunately empty. It didn't really get my blood pumping though, while my co-worker was scared shitless. I'm a pretty calm individual, whose only real fear in the world is abstract stuff like running out of coffee and cigarettes. There are many other potential creepy things out at night, which have never bothered me. We've had burglaries and attempted burglaries in the past, as there are lots of drugs at this place and no alarms. We've had animals doing their animal thing, and the relatives of the residents coming in unannounced in the middle of the night. But Mr. Sneaky Pants whispering in my ear in the dead of night definitely took the cake. I used to work late shift as classroom IT support for a college. We didn't get a lot of high priority calls from night classes, so among other duties, we'd get a lot of repairs and maintenance done that couldn't be done when the classrooms were in use during the day. I don't mind the dark, so I wasn't in the habit of turning on lights in the classroom if I was just going to be doing something really quick on the computer. Well, I had a ticket to install something on the instructor's PC in the classroom, one I'd never been to before. It's about 10 PM when I get around to the classroom, and I look inside the room. I get about halfway across when I suddenly freeze. The hairs on the back of my neck are standing up, and I'm 100% sure I'm being watched. No, I'm surrounded. Then, as the eyes start to adjust, I see them. The entire classroom is encircled by hospital beds sticking out of the walls, and in every bed There's a person sitting up looking at me. Holy shit. Oh, I'm sorry, I blurt out, before finally realizing they're all just plastic dummies, and I was in a nursing classroom. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I'm sorry that this video was a bit shorter than usual. I'm really not that well. This coughing just hasn't gone away. And although you guys didn't hear it, I have coughed so much during this recording. My voice has also gone a bit funny. I think I've coughed myself out. I went to the doctor's today actually, and I was told that it's the end of a virus and that there's nothing I could do. Oh, and apparently the doctor said that cough medicine, you know, that cough syrupy kind of stuff, that it doesn't actually do anything and that there's no point me even taking it. So that's always great to hear. Well, yeah, just gonna have to see how it goes. He said apparently in 5 days it should be gone. So something else a bit unfortunate that happened today. 2 days ago, the police story video, yeah, that was flagged as inappropriate for advertisers, which is a shame. So I just had to roll with it. And then it was deemed unfriendly for advertisers after a review, which meant that, you know, no adverts can run on that video. You know, I can kind of understand where they're coming from because there was a lot of suicide in that video and perhaps that's one of the things that they don't want so much. So fine, you know, I can respect that. But since then, you know, the trucker video got demonetized like that immediately. And this video, well, I hope it didn't, but I've got a pretty strong gut feeling that they're going to do the same thing. I just think that once you're on their radar, they just strike you down until, you know, they feel like they don't need to check up on you anymore, which is really annoying as this is like the 4th time this has happened to me. But anyway, just wanted to let you guys know, and yeah, just a bit annoying really. Also, I wanted to give a huge thank you to all of you amazing patrons out there. Without your generosity every month, it would be incredibly difficult to run the channel. So your help and support is tremendously appreciated and goes far beyond what you can imagine. Also wanted to let you know that tomorrow there is going to be a really fantastic art giveaway. So be sure to tune in to win some amazing art. All you're going to have to do is obviously comment, subscribe, hit the little bell icon, the usual. But tune in tomorrow to see it, check it out, and get the whole lowdown on the rules. If you enjoyed today's video, it would really mean a lot to me if you would just leave a like and drop a comment, as it goes a really long way and it helps other people with a taste for horror find my channel, which I would really appreciate. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the little bell icon. If you have a story that you wish to submit, feel free to send it to my Reddit or share it to my email. Both can be found in the description. Just please paragraph it and include as much description as possible to maximize the chances of it being read. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.